Almost nobody knows the real story behind this man. Millions recognize the name C.S. Lewis because of the Chronicles of Narnia, yet the greatest lesson he left the world was never hidden inside a wardrobe. It was hidden inside the human heart. Long before he became one of the 20th century's most influential writers, Lewis spent years wrestling with fear, grief, doubt, pride, imagination, and hope. He believed that the greatest battlefield was not between nations or armies, but within every person. What he discovered about human nature continues to challenge psychologists, philosophers, theologians, and ordinary readers nearly a century later. One historical fact surprises many people. C.S. Lewis, whose books inspired countless people to embrace faith, spent much of his early adulthood as a committed atheist. Even more remarkable, the arguments that eventually changed his own mind were not emotional experiences, but conversations, friendships, literature, and relentless intellectual honesty. Before this story ends, you will witness the quiet evening that transformed his life forever, the heartbreaking loss that reshaped everything he believed about love, and the timeless truth about human nature that still speaks to millions today. But first, tell me where you're watching from. Have you ever read a book by C.S. Lewis, or is this your first introduction to his remarkable life? I genuinely enjoy reading your thoughts, and I read every comment because they often become part of future documentaries. To understand what Lewis knew about human nature, we have to begin long before fame found him, in a city where beauty and sorrow existed side by side. Clive Staples Lewis was born on November 29, 1898, in Belfast, Ireland. The world he entered was one of horse-drawn carriages, coal fires, and rapidly changing ideas. His father, Albert James Lewis, worked as a successful solicitor known for his intelligence and passionate personality. His mother, Florence Augusta Lewis, was highly educated, one of the first women in Ireland to earn a degree in mathematics and logic. Their home overflowed with books, shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, inviting curiosity into every room. For young Lewis, those books became entire worlds. He later wrote that reading allowed him to travel farther than any train or ship ever could. Fairy tales, Norse myths, Greek legends, and classic adventures filled his imagination. Together with his older brother, Warren, whom everyone called Warnie, he invented elaborate kingdoms populated by talking animals, courageous heroes, and imaginary histories. Decades later, readers would recognize echoes of those childhood games in the magical landscapes of Narnia. Yet behind this joyful imagination stood a child who would soon encounter profound loss. In 1908, when Lewis was only 9 years old, his mother died from cancer. The loss devastated the family. Albert struggled under the weight of grief, and the warm household that had once echoed with laughter suddenly became painfully quiet. According to Lewis's own autobiographical reflections in Surprised by Joy, this tragedy marked one of the defining turning points of his life. Imagine the silence. The fire still burned in the fireplace. The books remained on the shelves. Rain continued tapping against the windows of the Belfast home. Yet nothing felt the same. For a young boy trying to understand suffering, the world suddenly appeared unpredictable and cruel. Many people spend their entire lives asking why painful events happen. Lewis was no different. His mother's death planted questions that would follow him for decades. Rather than drawing him closer to faith, tragedy initially pushed him away from it. The experience convinced him that the universe might be indifferent to human happiness. That reaction reveals one of Lewis's earliest insights into human nature. People rarely think their way into despair. More often, they hurt their way into it. This realization would later influence nearly everything he wrote. Lewis understood that beliefs are not formed only by facts. They are also shaped by wounds, disappointments, memories, and hope. Before he ever became a celebrated author, he had already begun studying the human heart simply by living through heartbreak. After his mother's death, Lewis attended several boarding schools, experiences he remembered with mixed emotions. Some were academically demanding, while others felt cold and deeply unpleasant. One school closed after its headmaster was declared mentally unstable. Such unsettling experiences exposed Lewis to authority at its worst and strengthened his independent mind. Eventually, he found greater stability under the private tutoring of William T. Kirkpatrick, a former schoolmaster renowned for his rigorous intellectual discipline. Lewis affectionately called him the Great Knock. Kirkpatrick demanded precise thinking. Every claim required evidence. Every assumption invited another question. Those relentless lessons sharpened Lewis's mind in extraordinary ways. Years later, whether discussing literature, morality, or faith, readers noticed the remarkable clarity of his reasoning. His ability to explain complex ideas in simple language did not appear by accident. It had been forged through countless hours of disciplined conversation and careful argument. Yet something even more important was taking shape beneath his growing intellect. Lewis became fascinated by what he later called joy. He did not mean ordinary happiness. Happiness could disappear when circumstances changed. Joy was different. It arrived unexpectedly through music, beautiful landscapes, ancient myths, or fleeting moments of wonder. It was an intense longing for something beyond ordinary experience, something impossible to fully possess. He spent years trying to understand why these moments appeared so powerful. Why could a melody awaken longing? Why could a sunset stir emotions that words struggled to describe? Why did stories of sacrifice and courage seem universally meaningful across cultures? These questions would eventually lead him toward one of his greatest conclusions about human nature. But before that discovery could happen, history itself would intervene. Europe was moving toward catastrophe, and a young student from Belfast would soon find himself standing in the mud, smoke, and unimaginable violence of the First World War. There, surrounded by destruction unlike anything he had ever imagined, Lewis would encounter another side of human nature, one that would test every belief he held and prepare him for the extraordinary journey that still lay ahead. The trenches of the First World War stripped away every comforting illusion. Mud swallowed boots. Artillery thundered across the scarred landscape. Smoke drifted over shattered fields where entire generations of young men struggled simply to survive another day. For Clive Staples Lewis, who arrived in France in late 1917 as a second lieutenant in the British Army, the war became more than a military conflict. It became an education in the extremes of human nature. Lewis served with the Somerset Light Infantry, and like thousands of soldiers, he witnessed suffering that words could scarcely capture. The fear was constant. Every sunrise carried uncertainty, and every quiet moment could be broken by the roar of exploding shells. According to his surviving letters and later recollections, the war exposed both the cruelty and the courage hidden within ordinary people. He saw acts of remarkable selflessness beside unimaginable destruction. That contradiction never left him. In April 1918, Lewis was seriously wounded when a British shell fell short of its target. The explosion killed one of his fellow officers and left Lewis injured by shrapnel. He was evacuated to England, where months of recovery gave him time to reflect on everything he had experienced. The physical wounds slowly healed, but the deeper questions remained. Why were human beings capable of creating breathtaking beauty while also committing terrible violence? Why could the same person display compassion one day and selfishness the next? Those questions would eventually become central themes in his writing. After the war, Lewis resumed his studies at the University of Oxford. His academic achievements were extraordinary. He earned first-class honors in classical moderations, greats, and English language and literature, an accomplishment achieved by very few students. His intellectual reputation grew rapidly, and in 1925 he was elected Fellow and Tutor in English Literature at Magdalen College, Oxford. Picture the atmosphere. Ancient stone buildings stood beneath grey English skies. Ivy climbed weathered walls. The quiet courtyards echoed with distant footsteps, while the scent of old books filled college libraries. In the evenings, the scratching of Lewis's fountain pen often continued long after others had gone to bed. He immersed himself in medieval literature, classical philosophy, poetry, mythology, and history, convinced that great books preserved timeless truths about human experience. Yet despite his academic success, Lewis remained spiritually unconvinced. He considered himself an atheist for many years. He admired reason and believed that every belief should withstand careful examination. Rather than accepting ideas because they were popular or comforting, he insisted on following evidence wherever it led. Ironically, that commitment to intellectual honesty would eventually challenge his own skepticism. Around this time, Lewis formed friendships that quietly changed the direction of his life. Among the most significant was a professor of Anglo-Saxon named J.R.R. Tolkien. Today, Tolkien is celebrated worldwide as the author of The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. But during those Oxford years, he was also a close friend who enjoyed long conversations about literature, mythology, language, and faith. Lewis also became part of a remarkable group of writers known as the Inklings. They met regularly in Oxford, often gathering at pubs such as the Eagle and Child or in college rooms to read unfinished manuscripts aloud. Imagine the scene. Pipes filled the air with smoke. Cups rested on worn wooden tables. Pages rustled as writers listened carefully to one another's stories, offering criticism, encouragement, and laughter. Some of the 20th century's most beloved books were shaped in those conversations. One evening in September 1931 proved especially significant. Lewis walked with Tolkien and fellow scholar Hugo Dyson along Addison's Walk at Magdalen College. They discussed myths, history, and Christianity deep into the night. According to Lewis's own later accounts, the conversation forced him to reconsider assumptions he had held for years. Tolkien argued that humanity's enduring myths reflected profound truths rather than mere fantasies. Lewis had always loved myths. What changed was his realization that perhaps the deepest longings expressed in ancient stories pointed towards something real instead of something imaginary. Days later, Lewis described himself as believing that Jesus Christ was the Son of God. He later wrote that he had entered the zoo reluctantly as an unbeliever but returned believing. It was not a sudden emotional conversion. It was the conclusion of years of questioning, reading, debating, and reflecting. Whether viewers share Lewis's religious convictions or not, the transformation illustrates an important lesson about human nature. Real intellectual growth often begins with the courage to admit that we might be mistaken. Lewis never treated changing his mind as weakness. He considered it evidence of genuine honesty. That same honesty shaped his writing style. Instead of speaking down to readers, he invited them into thoughtful conversations. He avoided unnecessary complexity because he believed truth should become clearer, not more confusing. His famous observation still resonates today. Friendship is born at that moment when one person says to another, "What? You too?" I thought I was the only one. The quotation explains something surprisingly profound. Human beings crave understanding more than admiration. We long to discover that our fears, hopes, and struggles are shared by others. Lewis recognized that loneliness often begins when people believe their inner battles are unique. As Europe drifted toward another devastating conflict, Lewis's ability to explain difficult ideas with warmth and clarity became increasingly valuable. When the Second World War erupted, Britain again faced enormous uncertainty. Air raid sirens echoed across cities. Families sheltered underground. Entire neighborhoods disappeared beneath bombs. During these frightening years, Lewis delivered a series of radio broadcasts for the BBC that reached millions of listeners searching for hope amid chaos. His calm voice entered homes illuminated only by dim lamps and flickering fireplaces. Parents listened beside their children. Soldiers on leave gathered around radios. Ordinary citizens, exhausted by war, found comfort in a speaker who refused easy answers but insisted that courage, responsibility, and hope remained possible even during history's darkest nights. If you're enjoying documentaries about history's greatest minds, subscribe because every week we explore the remarkable people whose ideas continue shaping our world today. Lewis believed that every choice, however small, gradually shaped character. He once compared human beings to ships sailing in formation. Success was not only about avoiding collisions with others, It also required each ship to function properly from within and to know its ultimate destination. The analogy remains powerful because it reminds us that personal integrity, healthy relationships, and meaningful purpose cannot be separated. His broadcasts were later collected into the book Mere Christianity, one of his most influential works. Decades after the war ended, readers around the world continue discovering its pages, finding surprisingly modern discussions about pride, forgiveness, morality, and the hidden motivations that drive human behavior. But just as Lewis reached the height of his literary influence, life prepared one final lesson that no philosophy alone could teach. The man who had written so persuasively about love, suffering, and hope would soon experience a heartbreak so profound that even his deepest convictions would be tested in ways he never expected. Success often creates the illusion that life's greatest battles are over. By the 1950s, C.S. Lewis had become one of the world's most respected writers. His radio broadcasts had inspired millions during the Second World War. Mere Christianity, the Screwtape Letters, and the Chronicles of Narnia had earned devoted readers across generations. He had achieved the recognition many authors only dream about. Yet the most personal chapter of his life was only beginning. In 1952, Lewis met the American writer Joy Davidman, whose intelligence, wit, and courage immediately impressed him. Their friendship grew through letters and conversations, rooted in mutual respect and shared curiosity. What began as an intellectual companionship gradually deepened into genuine affection. Their relationship was unconventional by the standards of the time. After Joy moved to England, they first entered into a civil marriage in 1956, largely to help her remain in the country. Soon afterward, doctors diagnosed her with advanced bone cancer. As her illness progressed, Lewis realized that his feelings had become far deeper than he had initially admitted. The couple later received a Christian marriage ceremony while Joy was in the hospital. For a time, her health unexpectedly improved. They traveled together, laughed together, and experienced a season of happiness that Lewis had never imagined possible after years of bachelorhood. Friends noticed a visible change in him. The reserved Oxford scholar seemed lighter, warmer, and more joyful. He had spent decades writing about love, but now he was living it. Then tragedy returned. Joy's cancer came back, and on July 13th, 1960, she died at the age of 45. Lewis was devastated. Many people expected the famous Christian writer to accept the loss with calm certainty. Instead, he responded with painful honesty. In the private reflections later published as A Grief Observed, he described grief not as a neat philosophical puzzle, but as a deeply human experience filled with confusion, longing, anger, and unanswered questions. Those pages remain among the most moving works he ever wrote because they refuse to pretend that faith eliminates sorrow. Instead, Lewis showed that courage sometimes means continuing to seek truth even while the heart is breaking. One of his most memorable observations reads, "No one ever told me that grief felt so like fear." The sentence is striking because it captures an emotion countless people recognize but struggle to describe. Lewis understood that grief is not simply sadness. It can unsettle the body, cloud the mind, and make the familiar world feel strangely unfamiliar. By expressing that experience with honesty, he gave comfort to readers who realized they were not alone. This was perhaps Lewis's deepest insight into human nature. People do not become stronger by avoiding suffering. They become wiser by allowing suffering to deepen compassion rather than harden the heart. Throughout his life, Lewis consistently argued that pride was humanity's most dangerous weakness. In Mere Christianity, he described pride as the vice from which many others grow because it encourages people to place themselves above everyone else. Modern psychology often reaches similar conclusions, recognizing that excessive self-centeredness damages relationships, empathy, and personal growth. Lewis believed that humility did not mean thinking less of yourself. It meant thinking of yourself less often. That simple distinction remains surprisingly practical. Human nature naturally pulls us toward comparison, competition, and constant concern about how others perceive us. Lewis challenged readers to redirect their attention toward truth, service, friendship, and love instead. His understanding of imagination was equally remarkable. Many people assume imagination is an escape from reality. Lewis believed the opposite. He argued that stories prepare us to recognize truth more clearly. Through Aslan, Lucy, Edmund, and the children who stepped through the wardrobe into Narnia, he explored courage, forgiveness, sacrifice, temptation, betrayal, and redemption in ways that readers of every age could understand. Children delighted in the adventures. Adults discovered profound questions hidden beneath them. That ability to speak simultaneously to both audiences explains why the Chronicles of Narnia continue to be translated into dozens of languages and loved around the world. Lewis also reminded readers that ordinary choices quietly shape extraordinary lives. Character is not built during dramatic moments alone. It grows through daily habits, private decisions, and seemingly insignificant acts repeated over years. Every kind word, every honest conversation, every difficult act of forgiveness becomes part of the person we are becoming. His own life reflected that conviction. Students remembered him as generous with his time. Friends described his hospitality. He answered countless letters from readers, often responding thoughtfully to strangers seeking guidance. Although famous, he remained remarkably approachable. In 1954, Lewis accepted the chair of medieval and Renaissance literature at Magdalen College, Cambridge, where he continued teaching and writing. His scholarship earned respect even among those who disagreed with his conclusions, because he combined intellectual rigor with genuine curiosity. On November 22, 1963, CS. Lewis died at his home, the Kilns, near Oxford, just 1 week before his 65th birthday. By an extraordinary coincidence of history, his death occurred on the same day that President John F. Kennedy was assassinated in the United States, and author Aldous Huxley also passed away. News of those global events overshadowed Lewis's death, and many newspapers devoted little attention to it. History, however, had not finished telling his story. As decades passed, readership of his books continued to grow. Scholars studied his essays. Teachers introduced new generations to Narnia. Philosophers engaged his arguments. Writers admired his clarity. Readers facing grief, doubt, loneliness, or questions about meaning found unexpected companionship in his words. Historical references and recommended reading for this documentary can be found in the video description if you would like to explore Lewis's life and writings in greater depth. So what did C.S. Lewis truly know about human nature? He understood that every person longs for meaning that success alone cannot provide. He knew that imagination can reveal truths facts alone sometimes fail to illuminate. He recognized that suffering can either poison the soul or deepen compassion. He believed friendship changes lives, humility frees the heart, and love always involves vulnerability. Most importantly, he reminded us that the greatest battles are often invisible. They are fought within conscience, character, hope, fear, and the quiet decisions nobody else sees. That is why his work continues to endure. The castles of Narnia may belong to fantasy, but the struggles of its characters belong to every generation. The questions Lewis asked remain our questions. How should we live? What gives life meaning? Why do beauty and longing awaken something so deep inside us? How can ordinary people choose courage over fear? Perhaps that is why millions still open his books today. Not because they expect easy answers, but because they find an honest guide who never underestimated either the darkness or the dignity of being human. Lewis once wrote, "You are never too old to set another goal or to dream a new dream." Whether you see those words as practical wisdom, personal encouragement, or timeless hope, they remind us that growth remains possible for as long as we are willing to pursue truth with humility and courage. If one lesson from C.S. Lewis's life stands above all others, it is this: never stop seeking what is true, even when the journey leads you somewhere you never expected to go. Which lesson impacted you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments below because I genuinely read every comment and I'd love to hear your perspective. If you enjoyed this cinematic journey through the life and ideas of one of history's greatest minds, subscribe for more documentaries exploring the remarkable people whose wisdom continues shaping our world today. Until next time, thank you for watching.